Welcome to Learn, Lead, Transform, where we talk about all things related to work relationships with a focus on leadership, leadership development, and high-performing teams. I'm your host, William Roy, and this is episode number 1. In this episode, I wanted to introduce this series, this podcast, and to do that, I'm going to focus on the title of the podcast, which is Learn, Lead, Transform. So we'll look at each one briefly, talk about each one a little bit, and give you a sense of where we're going to go. Heads up, next week, I'll have an interview on here with Morag Barrett. If you don't know who she is, look her up, Google her name, look for the Sky Team, and I think you'll enjoy the conversation that we have. So let's start with the idea of learn. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about when it comes to learning is, in order to learn, we have to take on an attitude of humility. We have to realize that the person we're learning from knows more about a topic than we do. And to do that, we have to humble ourselves, stop thinking that we are the leader, the boss, the person who knows everything about the topic, the subject expert. And we have to humble ourselves to say, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to interact with you in a way where I can soak up your expertise, your knowledge. And incidentally, humility is one of the most important factors, qualities, let's call it a quality of any leader. Leaders need to be humble because leaders should always be in a learning stance, a learning position. Just because you're leading a team doesn't mean you can't learn from that team. Just because you might consider yourself the leader in your home doesn't mean you can't learn from your spouse, doesn't mean you can't learn from your children. So humility is an attitude and really a positional attitude, probably is the best thing, a positional attitude that we take in life to constantly be learning, to constantly realize that there are gaps in our understanding, there are gaps in our knowledge, and there's gap in our expertise, and others can help us fill those gaps. When we take on that attitude of learning, we also need to understand that leadership is learned, and that's by everyone. Now, sometimes you have people that are identified as natural-born leaders, but in reality, there is no such thing as a natural-born leader. Everybody learns leadership somewhere from someone. And many times when we look at those who seem to be natural-born leaders, what we're actually seeing are people that were in a family where leadership was modeled by the parents, by other close family members. And so young, impressionable kids pick up on the actions, the speech, the attitudes, the perspectives that facilitate leadership. And so it seems like they are natural leaders when in reality, they learned at a very, very early age. They also, part of humility, part of learning is learning how to listen to others. Now, I like what Jordan Peterson says. He says, you should always listen to others as if they have something important to tell you. And listen in such a way that they tell you. So what does that mean in a practical sense? Well, you should always listen to hear what's actually being said. Listen to understand, not listen to respond. And too many of us listen to respond rather than listen to understand. So part of that is asking questions along the way or doing what Chris Voss calls mirroring. So let's say someone is explaining something to you. Maybe you don't fully understand what they're trying to say. Well, one way to get them to more fully elaborate on what they're saying and help you understand is to mirror maybe the last 3 words. And it might look something like, say someone says, I've gone back to school. Okay, well, that leaves a lot of gaps, doesn't it? You don't know where they're going to school. You don't know what they're studying. You don't know why they went back to school. So you might say, going back to school, and that gives them the opportunity to respond and open up and elaborate. You should also pause. This is a good strategy to pause after someone finishes talking. Think about what they said. Make sure you heard what they said. Make sure you weren't in your own thoughts planning your next response, but instead, make sure you heard what they said. Somehow find a way to acknowledge it, either repeat it, summarize it, mirror, label it. Labeling would be like, what it seems like you're feeling this, or you want this, and that helps to clarify, to make sure that you're understanding what's being said, right? So there are ways to listen more effectively, and that's part of humility, and it's definitely part of being a good leader. Now, what else about learning can we say? Learning is essential for development. So you're not going to develop as a leader, as a person, as an individual, as an employee, whatever context you want to put it in. You're not going to continue to develop, to increase your skills, to increase your understanding, increase your mental complexity, which we'll get into a little later, unless you have an attitude of humility and you're willing to learn every single day, every single day. And in this path of learning, it's also important to understand there's a difference between technical learning or learning technical skills and an adaptive learning, which means a change in mindset. And the change in mindset is going to be a lot more effective for you as an individual, as a person, as a leader, an employee, a friend, a spouse, in every context. That adaptive learning is going to do more for you to make you a better person and better at whatever role you're playing than learning any technical skills. Although there's a place for technical skills and they're also important. But the adaptive learning is something that we really need to focus on. And we'll do a podcast later talking about the technical versus adaptive and how the adaptive benefits us. All right, so that's learn. We need to be in an attitude of learning all the time. And as we learn, we move into lead, because the world needs good leadership, right? And there's so many, we've had about 100 years or so of good research into leadership, but only about maybe 20, 30 years of good research into leadership development. The world has lots of people in leadership positions, but it doesn't have a lot of good leaders in those positions. We have a lot of managers that are managing the work, managing the process, but we don't have a lot of good leaders that are forming the relationships with their teams and with people and with others within the organization and the community to drive the performance of everyone to that next level, to encourage and motivate and connect with people in a way that just makes life so much more enjoyable. So leadership is sorely lacking. We should also have a good working definition of leadership as we move forward. And I think we'll save that for another episode too. Understand that leadership doesn't require a title or a position. You don't have to be the VP of HR, for example, to be a leader, or the manager to be a leader, or the team lead to be a leader. We're leaders in our lives. We're leaders with our friends. We're leaders with our families. And that doesn't mean we're always in the leadership role in those positions, but from time to time, any conversation with a friend, you and your friend exchange leadership throughout the course of the relationship, even throughout the course of a single conversation. You know, one may take the lead in one conversation because maybe they know more about it. Maybe they're more passionate about it. Maybe it means more to them, or it's more personal, but that will shift as the conversation continues, and maybe you switch to a different topic. So leadership happens all the time, every day. You'll be a leader in some situations, but not in others. And so it's important to understand that in some capacity, all of us are leaders. And so at some level, we should all be learning to up our leadership. Now, one thing that I won't get into a lot of detail here, but we will talk about in a different episode, is the idea that mental complexity is correlated to good performance in leadership and everything else. Mental complexity basically is the ability to think of things in a qualitatively more complex manner, more nuanced manner would probably be a better word. I'm saying more complex sounds like we're just complicating things, but that's not the meaning behind it. There are different levels of mental complexity, and people can go from one to the next to the next. There's three, but most people don't. Probably about 60% of the population, and we're talking about worldwide population, probably never advances beyond the first plateau or level of mental complexity. So throughout this podcast, we'll also focus on helping you develop your mental complexity so that you're a better leader, a better spouse, a better friend, a better everything in every realm. And it's a great system. It's a great program. And I hope to give you a little bit more insight on why mental complexity is so much more important than other things that we may have focused on in the past. Incidentally, mental complexity has nothing to do with IQ. You can have high levels of mental complexity and not be a genius. That's enough about that. So then we get to transform. So what are we talking about with transform? Well, as we grow, we learn, and we lead, we should be transforming our own life, our own self, our own person, to be more mentally complex, to be able to handle bigger and better situations, and better able to handle the bad situations too, because they will come. So we need to transform our life. We need to help transform the lives of others by providing that relationship and providing that leadership through relationship. And in that way, we transform the world one life at a time. That's the best way to do it. That's, I think, the best strategy for living our life. Is like, I'm going to touch this life today. I know I'm having a meeting with this person. I know my friend and I are having lunch today. I know I'm going to see my wife or your husband. You're going to see your kids. And somehow, some way, I'm going to impart something to them that's going to add value to them, that's going to help make their lives better in some way, or at least lessen the anxiety or suffering they're feeling in their life, because by definition, that makes their life better. And we're going to change the world one life at a time. That you can do. Deciding you're going to tackle these huge social problems and that you're going to do everything you can to change it. Well, the way you change it is one life at a time. One life at a time. And so that, my friends, is the focus of this podcast. That's where we're going to go. As I said, please stay tuned for next week's episode, where we have Morag Barrett in an amazing interview. I just can't tell you how pleased I am with the way that conversation went. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and focus on your own development. Learn, lead, transform.